First, you'll have to know what happens when an atomic bomb explodes. You'll know when it comes. We hope it never comes, but get ready. It looks something like this.
In 1947, an international group of researchers called the Chicago Atomic Scientists began publishing a magazine titled The Bulletin of Atomic Scientists. This group of scientists had previously worked on the Manhattan Project, a World War II research and development undertaking tasked with producing the world's first nuclear weapons. They succeeded in their research and ended up creating 2 atomic warheads, Fat Man and Little Boy. The cover of the first edition of the bulletin included a clock in the background, with the minute hand at 7 minutes before midnight. To many people, this may just seem like another normal clock, not representing anything special. But this clock is quite the opposite. This isn't any normal clock. This clock represents utter anthropogenic global catastrophe, which might be confusing to hear, so let me word it like this. The clock represents total obliteration by the hands of mankind. Since published in 1947, the bulletin has updated the minute hand of the clock every year. The hand can move both forwards and backwards, and does so according to many factors: nuclear tension, global warming, and many other things. In 1947, the clock was at 7 minutes to midnight. In 1963, 12 minutes. In 1991, 17 minutes. But today, in 2018, we aren't 20 minutes away, we aren't 10 minutes away, we aren't 5 minutes away. We're 2 minutes away. 2 minutes from midnight. 2 minutes from complete obliteration. Today, when discussing the destructive power of nuclear weapons, or asteroids, or any large-scale detonation, we tend to measure them by how much TNT is needed to produce an equivalent explosion. For example, Fat Man and Little Boy, the bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki during World War II, were at the time the most powerful and most destructive weapons ever made. Fat Man was a plutonium bomb, and had a blast yield of over 21 kilotons, or over 21,000 tons of TNT. Little Boy, on the other hand, was a uranium bomb, and had a blast yield of over 15 kilotons. However, these explosions didn't exactly reach their full potential. See, Fat Man was jam-packed with about 6.5 kilograms of plutonium, but when it detonated over the city of Nagasaki, only about 1 kilogram of that material actually fissioned. A little over 16%. Not bad. Little Boy, on the other hand, was a lot worse. See, it contained over 64 kilograms of enriched uranium. However, whenever it dropped over Hiroshima, less than 1 kilogram of that uranium actually fissioned. That's a little over 1%. Even though neither of these bombs lived up to their full potential, the fissioning of less than 2 kilograms of plutonium and uranium was enough to kill over 200,000 people. People used to live here, and then, in a blink of an eye, they're ghost towns. And that was 1945. And since then, over 125,000 nuclear weapons have been made that are much, much more powerful than both Fat Man and Little Boy combined. In 1961, the Soviet Union detonated a hydrogen bomb over the remote Siberian wilderness. This bomb had a yield of not 15,000 tons, not 21,000 tons, not even 100,000 tons. It had a yield of over 50 million tons of TNT. The bomb has many names: Project 7000, Product Code 202, RDS 220, but the majority of people know this as the Tsar Bomba. When the Tsar Bomba was detonated, the mushroom cloud from the explosion exited the layer of the atmosphere that we live in and stretched far into the mesosphere. The mushroom cloud was over 64 kilometers high, that's over 7 Mount Everest stacked on top of each other. The explosion could be seen from over 300 kilometers away, and the shockwave from the blast broke window panes nearly 1,000 kilometers away from the explosion. The shockwave circled the planet 3 times before it finally died out, and this wasn't even the most powerful version thought of. The bomb was actually initially planned to be 100 megatons, which amounts to 100 million tons of TNT. It was eventually decided against, as a full 100 megaton explosion could have easily sent the world into a global nuclear winter. However, the fact that the bomb was theorized and nearly became a reality is truly terrifying. Superimposing the 100 megaton explosion over popular cities around the globe really puts the destruction into perspective. If 10 of these bombs were detonated over the world's most populated cities, the casualties The use of just 10 of these bombs on those specific cities could cause almost as many deaths in just one day as there were fatalities from the combined total of every war in the 20th century. From just 10 of these bombs. Today, however, in 2018, there are an estimated 15,000 nuclear weapons in the world on standby, waiting to be launched at any moment. And if or when these bombs are used, it won't just be one. It won't be 10, it will be all of them. See, if two countries that have access to nuclear weapons end up in a conflict, and that conflict escalates to the point to where these nukes are used, there's no reason for either side to hold back. Because if one side fires one nuke towards the other, why would the other side only send one back? There isn't some written rule that says you have to play fair. No, not at all. It's quite the opposite. Studies have been conducted on the idea of a regional nuclear war between the two countries of Pakistan and India. Not only would death be inevitable from just that region, this would affect every last person on the planet. These countries have about 200 nukes combined. If all of these weapons were used and pinpointed to the right cities, it's more than likely that you could see upwards of more than 100 million casualties in just those countries alone. The fallout from these weapons, that is, the radiation that is spread throughout the air after the bombs go off, would be enough to finish off most of the population of those countries, if anyone was even alive after the initial impacts. But that's only the beginning of the problem. The smoke and dust from these bombs will spread much further than just India and Pakistan. Nuclear fallout would make its way into the atmosphere and end up coating the planet in a layer of smoke and dust. This would ultimately block out most of the sun's rays that reach the planet, which would end up causing the failure of plants and crops that all humans and life need to survive. Black rain would fall from the sky, rain polluted with radiation and dust. The fallout from these bombs would cause even more casualties than the initial explosions themselves. From only 200 nukes, compare this 200 to the total number of nuclear weapons in the world today, and you'll find that it's barely over 1%. 1% of the entire nuclear arsenal of the planet, in the perfect circumstances, is enough to cause over 1 billion deaths. In 2008 at Oxford University, the Future of Humanity Institute conducted a survey among participants at the university, asking them to make their best guess at the chance on possible extinction level events before 2100. The results of this survey actually covered the threat of a nuclear Armageddon and placed the estimates of at least 1 billion people dead by the hands of nuclear weapons at 10%, and placed the odds of complete human extinction by nuclear weapons at 1% by 2100. 1% doesn't seem that high, a 1 in 100 chance. But think about this. The chance of you dying in an airplane accident is 1 in 11 million. The chance of you dying by lightning is 1 in 84,000. The chance of humanity being wiped out by nuclear weapons is more likely than you dying from almost anything else other than heart disease and cancer. This 1% assumes the worst scenario possible. The conflict you hear about more often involves the countries of the United States and Russia, who respectively own over 90% of the nukes that exist today. If for some reason these two countries went to war with each other, the results definitely wouldn't be good. Should the United States and Russia go into a full-scale nuclear war with both sides throwing everything they have at each other, this may as well be the end of civilization as you know it. See, the goal of a war of that magnitude isn't for any one side to win. It's to make sure the other side loses, and the best way to make sure that the other side loses is not to wait to see them stand next to you on the podium, but rather take them out of the picture completely. And that's exactly what the goal of this war would entail. On top of the massive number of nukes dropped on major cities across both countries, agricultural centers, hospitals, schools, and many more facilities would be destroyed to ensure that both sides endure the most suffering. Both sides know that this isn't a game that has a pause button, that once you pick up the controller, you can't put it back down. Once a nuclear warhead is confirmed to have been sent to either side, the idea of a nuclear holocaust becomes a reality. Today, the doomsday clock is the lowest that it has ever been, and should we leave the issues at hand unchecked, the clock will inevitably keep ticking forward. In the book Reasons and Persons, author Derek Parfit posed the following question. Compare these three outcomes. Peace, a nuclear war that kills 99% of the world's population, or a nuclear war that kills 100% of the world's population. 2 could be worse than 1, and 3 could be worse than 2. But the question is, which is the greater of these two differences? If we find ourselves in a full-scale nuclear war, is it even worth trying to survive? Because in the end, if you survive, no one will be there waiting for you. The global nuclear winter that would come from this would leave almost every major city uninhabitable for years to come. The 1983 movie War Games is set in America during the midst of the Cold War. It discusses many possible outcomes of nuclear wars of various magnitudes. In it, there is a quote that states,
"The only winning move is not to play."
And I find that really fits the situation. The only way to survive and come out on top at the end of the day is not to play the game in the first place. Because, should you participate, the clock ticks over to midnight.
On the 5th of February 1958, a Mark 15 thermonuclear bomb was loaded onto a B-47 aircraft stationed at Homestead Air Force Base in southern Florida. The plane was to take part in an extended training mission meant to simulate an attack on the Soviet Union. Over the course of 9 hours, it took a winding, circuitous route across the United States, flying over the Gulf of Mexico, up to Chicago, then back down to its target in Radford, Virginia. The intent was both to exhaust the crew, as they would be on a trip to Moscow, and to assess the bomber's ability to perform aerial maneuvers with heavy weapons aboard. The 3,400 kilogram nuclear bomb served as test cargo. This might seem incredibly reckless to us today, but during the height of the Cold War, training exercises like this were fairly routine. In fact, just 2 years later, the United States would implement Operation Chrome Dome, a defense strategy in which planes armed with nuclear weapons were kept in the skies at all times, just in case war with the USSR ever broke out. Once above its target in Radford, the B-47 sent an electronic beam to a station on the ground, simulating a strike, after which it recorded the mission as a success. Unfortunately, on their way back to Florida, there was a bit of a mix-up. As the crew celebrated, a group of F-86 fighter jets was flying out of Charleston Air Force Base in South Carolina. The jets were directed to intercept the bomber as part of a separate training mission, but what the pilots didn't know was that there were actually 2 B-47s in the air. Above Tybee Island off the coast of the state of Georgia, the Charleston squadron spotted its target. As one of the intercepting jets locked onto what he believed to be the sole bomber, a second aircraft appeared above him, and the two collided. This was the plane with the bomb. The F-86 was destroyed and the pilot was forced to eject. The B-47, meanwhile, managed to stay airborne, though just barely. It had been heavily damaged and was losing altitude. Deciding it was better to drop its cargo rather than risk a crash landing, the bomber's pilot jettisoned the nuclear payload, releasing a bomb with an explosive yield equivalent to 1.7 megatons of TNT above the US soil. For some perspective, that's 113 times the strength of the bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima. The blast radius from a weapon of this magnitude would have encompassed an area of around 620 square kilometers, just slightly smaller than New York City. After being deployed, the bomb fell for over 9,000 meters before eventually crashing into Wassaw Sound. Luckily, it didn't detonate. If it had, thousands would have died instantly, and the city of Savannah, less than a 30-minute drive from the crash site, would likely have become inhabitable due to radioactive fallout. A recovery mission was immediately organized. A joint Air Force and Navy operation searched this area for 10 weeks. but the weapon was never located. Experts believed it had sunk beneath several meters of silt on impact, effectively rendering it invisible to sonar. Subsequent recovery attempts have produced few results, and to this day, a bomb capable of vaporizing an entire city is buried somewhere just off the US coast. The story of the Tybee Island bomb is terrifying in its own right, but you want to know the worst part? It's not the only time this has happened. A similar thing occurred in 1965 when a training exercise being held on the USS Ticonderoga went horribly wrong. An attack jet carrying a live 1 megaton nuclear bomb was being rolled into one of the ship's plane elevators when it began to tilt. Before anyone knew what was going on, the jet rolled off the side of the aircraft carrier and fell into the Pacific Ocean, taking the pilot with it. Plane, pilot, and bomb were never recovered. In modern history, there have been 32 reported broken arrow events, which are accidents involving nuclear weapons. These range from crashes and unintended detonations to fires, accidental launches, and potential meltdowns. In 6 of these incidents, the weapon was never recovered. Besides the 6 missing bombs, a number of nuclear-tipped torpedoes, primarily Soviet, have also disappeared or are otherwise unrecoverable. While only possessing a fraction of the destructive capability of a bomb or missile, these weapons still contain highly radioactive materials and could potentially leak contaminants into the surrounding ocean, killing sea life. You might be wondering how military officials and world leaders could simply abandon missing nuclear weapons. Shouldn't governments be scrambling to recover these devices? Unfortunately, it's not that simple. All 6 of the missing bombs were lost at sea, whether in Wassaw Sound or deep in the Pacific. Simply figuring out the exact location for even one of these weapons would likely require hundreds of people searching for months, if not years. Looking for something you dropped in the ocean is like looking for a needle in a haystack, only the haystack is hundreds of kilometers wide, shifts constantly, and requires the use of advanced technology to search it. There are no points of reference or any kind of markers to guide you. Worse than that, stuff that falls into the ocean tends to move around. Currents and tides can carry even the heaviest objects for kilometers before they finally come to rest on the seafloor. And all of that is just to find the bomb. Recovery is a whole different story. According to experts, digging up these weapons could prove more dangerous than simply letting them stay where they are. Take the case of the Tybee Island bomb. To date, there have been no unusual spikes in radiation detected in the area. This means, in all likelihood, the materials inside the bomb are still contained. Any attempt to retrieve it would risk potentially spilling toxic plutonium and uranium into the ocean. So even if you found it, it would be too dangerous to dig up, so it's safer to leave it alone. But that's only assuming the device is disabled. It's normally protocol to remove the triggering mechanism from a nuclear weapon when it's being used in a training mission, and the Air Force maintains that this was the case in the Tybee Island incident. However, former Assistant Secretary of Defense W.J. Howard described the bomb in a 1966 congressional testimony as a complete weapon, a bomb with a nuclear capsule. The fact remains that no one is really sure whether or not the bomb was disabled. There could potentially be an active thermonuclear weapon sitting just off of America's eastern seaboard. If you're freaking out about it, that's understandable. The idea that there are missing weapons capable of killing millions of people hiding somewhere beneath the ocean is chilling, to say the least. But I'm afraid I have some more bad news because here's the thing, these are just the bombs we know about. The vast majority of broken arrow incidents have been recorded by the United States. But there are 7 other territories known to possess nuclear weapons: Russia, China, the United Kingdom, France, India, Pakistan, Israel, and North Korea. While the US has been historically at least semi-transparent about its nuclear mess-ups, these other nations have been much more secretive. We know very little, if anything at all, about their nuclear programs and almost nothing of any mishaps. It's likely that we don't even have a full account of every broken arrow. Russia in particular has a tremendously checkered past when it comes to nuclear technology. Aside from the obvious example of Chernobyl, there's also the case of the Tsar Bomba. The largest nuclear weapon ever detonated, this device had a 50 megaton yield, producing shockwaves that were felt around the globe, and a mushroom cloud 8 times the height of Mount Everest. The bomba was so large that some scientists were afraid it might ignite the atmosphere. At the peak of its power, the Soviet Union maintained the largest stockpile ever held by a single nation, with an estimated 45,000 weapons. Given the size of this arsenal and the historic recklessness of the Soviet military when it came to nuclear technology, it's not a stretch to assume that they probably lost a bomb or two. Other countries such as China and North Korea are even more secretive about their nuclear weapons programs. Both nations today are currently looking to expand their arsenals, with the latter rumored to be on the cusp of resuming testing again. And even when it comes to the US, figures could be very well underreported for reasons we might not be aware of. In the case of the USS Ticonderoga bomb, it took the US Navy 15 years to admit the incident even happened. Even worse, at the time, they claimed the bomb had been lost over 800 kilometers away from land, but it was later discovered it had disappeared just 109 kilometers from Japan's Ryukyu Island chain. It's possible then that there could be dozens of lost nuclear devices lurking in unknown locations around the world, the presence only known by a handful of top officials. The danger that these weapons pose shouldn't be understated. According to a declassified 1947 study from the Los Alamos laboratory, as many as 100 NSVUS-10 could be enough to end society. We know we've lost 6, but how many are we truly missing? Granted, it's nearly impossible to imagine a scenario where all of these weapons would explode simultaneously. But even if one were to detonate, the scale of devastation, suffering, and environmental catastrophe would be unimaginable. It would be a disaster unparalleled in history. The sad reality is that through sheer recklessness, our leaders have opened the door to the possibility of causing ourselves irreparable harm, both to humanity and the planet. The majority of the world's nuclear stockpiles were built during the Cold War as the United States and Soviet Union sought to intimidate one another and flex their military might. This arms race eventually culminated in a strategy of mutually assured destruction, otherwise known as MAD, a concept that saw both nations amass thousands of nuclear weapons as a kind of safeguard against any potential conflict. The thinking was that if both sides had enough firepower to wipe the other off the face of the planet, then neither would pull the trigger. But humans are clumsy, we make mistakes. Even when every possible precaution is taken, accidents still happen. Just look at the Titanic, the space shuttle disasters, or Fukushima. And nothing is a better testament to this than the nuclear strategies adopted by governments around the world. Operation Chrome Dome, for instance, resulted in 5 separate crashes. A program meant to serve as a guarantee against the possibility of nuclear disaster itself nearly led to tragedy. The most infamous of these is the 1961 Goldsboro B-52 crash. Now the subject of innumerable history specials and YouTube videos, this incident has become something of a legend, not for what happened, but for what didn't happen. Perhaps the most alarming broken arrow incident ever recorded, the Goldsboro crash occurred when a B-52 bomber flying over Goldsboro, North Carolina, suffered a mechanical failure. The aircraft's right wing sprung a fuel leak and the plane was ordered to make an emergency landing. Just 24 kilometers from its base, the bomber began breaking up and exploded in midair, sending fiery debris hurtling towards Earth, along with 2 3.8 megaton thermonuclear bombs. Each one of these devices was more than twice as powerful as the Tybee Island bomb and contained more firepower than the combined destructive force of every man-made explosion from the beginning of time to the end of World War II. Luckily, neither bomb detonated. One landed safely, slowly brought to the ground after its parachute successfully deployed. The other, more disastrously, crashed with full force, digging itself 55 meters down into the earth. While pieces of this device were recovered, the bomb's plutonium core still remains buried. The US military initially attempted to retrieve it, but abandoned the operation when it proved impossible to reach and simply purchased the land instead. Ironically, it was the bomb that landed with the parachute that posed the bigger risk. A later examination revealed that 3 of its 4 arming mechanisms had activated after separation. Literally, the only thing that prevented the weapon from going off was the failure of 2 wires to cross. All this begs the question, is it all worth it? The idea that we could somehow ensure our survival by constructing hordes of weapons capable of annihilating the planet seems like a bad idea from the start. When you consider the possibility that any one of these devices could be lost or detonate accidentally, such a strategy appears downright irresponsible. Yes, MAD might prevent the world powers from pressing the proverbial button that leads to nuclear war. But what about all the broken arrows? Is it really worth the gamble? Or are we just 2 crossed wires away from, well, mutually assured destruction?
Up until I was like 15, the way I found new music was through friends, or songs I'd hear in the background of my favorite TV shows or movies. This can be a really slow process if you, like me, have a somewhat unconventional taste in music, and so it was no surprise that I would only add a few new songs to my playlist every few months. But as of recent years, that's definitely changed. You see, Spotify has been able to identify my tastes remarkably well. With this Discover Weekly and year-end playlist, Spotify seems to know what I like better than some of my closest friends. It follows a similar trend of surprising improvements in the fields of natural language processing and machine learning. So, when did Spotify and other apps get this good, and what does it mean for the future of technology? These and other recent advances are occurring at a surprising rate, or at least that's what it seems like. It is, after all, progressing exponentially, and we humans are very ill-equipped when it comes to visualizing or imagining such growth. We simply never evolved to do so. Animals, predators and prey, all move at a relatively constant rate. They don't keep accelerating. Technological progress, however, does. As it turns out, this exponential growth means we might be stepping into some very uncharted territory in the near future. If technology continues to get better and better at its current pace, we will soon reach a stage where it not only matches, but surpasses the intelligence of a human. Couple that with an ability to learn and an incentive to survive, and well, we don't know what will happen next. This is the technological singularity. Borrowed from astrophysics, the term singularity refers to a tipping point beyond which all laws that are currently known simply fall apart, like how the laws of physics fall apart beyond the singularity of a black hole. A technological singularity is a similar tipping point when technological progress is so overwhelming that we'll no longer be in control of it, or the things that it will lead to. In 1875, Karl Landsteiner, an Austrian biologist, noted that when a man was giving a blood transfusion from another animal, the foreign blood tended to clump up in the blood vessels of the man, which can cause shock, which then ultimately leads to death. This, and years of research that followed, led him to discover blood groups, for which he was awarded the Nobel Prize in 1930. Today, he is remembered as the father of blood transfusion medicine, and we have him to thank for being able to donate and receive blood safely. When there is a technological singularity, scientists predict computers will be able to make life-changing Nobel Prize-winning discoveries just like this every 5 seconds. That may seem like an incredible future, or potentially life-threatening one, and that's exactly why the prospect of a technological singularity is so complicated. On one hand, it may seem like rapidly progressing technology can eventually enslave humanity, but it also has an immense potential to improve human life, and this potential is the reason why it is being developed so rapidly. There are enormous incentives to devote even more resources to the development of artificial intelligence, economic and otherwise. For example, it can help companies curate products each customer is more likely to buy and need, something practically impossible to do man for man. It can predict when demand is going to be low to prevent wastage. It can also conduct research faster than any human ever has. These innovations can lead to other less inspiring changes in human society too. After all, if scientific research can be done with a computer, what use is there for researchers anymore? If cars can drive themselves and nanobots can repair organs and 3D printers can literally print bridges, are all jobs simply going to be replaced? Well, at its current state, the technology we have is only good enough to replace repetitive labor, such as connecting a car door to its chassis. For most things that are more complicated, we still need human intervention. But it's not about now, anyways. It's about the future. And without thorough consideration, we may be headed for unemployment the likes of which humanity has never seen. And if recent events haven't made it clear, it's not just about the economy or salaries, but also about the meaning that most of us tend to derive from our work. You know, not doing anything, as it turns out, is really boring. Okay, sometimes it's nice. We've established that technological progress is not slowing down anytime soon. What happens when computers replace not only our labor, but also our intellect? What happens when they can mimic intelligence and learn on their own? All this could lead to a scenario where technology is not so friendly to us, or instead of just replacing us, it decides to do away with us completely. And in such a situation, without much preparation, we would be completely powerless. To hypothesize what would happen to our species during such an event, scientists decided to look at what history tells us about how a more intelligent species, us humans, treats its less intelligent counterparts, monkeys. You know, the same monkeys that we caged up, killed, ran any and all tests on, and had no ethical qualms about until very recently? Yes, those monkeys. Sam Harris provides an analogy in his regard to help us visualize how we might be treated based on our own past behavior. He draws on the relationship we humans have with ants by saying, "We don't hate them, We don't go out of our way to harm them. In fact, sometimes we take pains not to harm them. We step over them on the sidewalk. But whenever their presence seriously conflicts with one of our goals, we annihilate them without a thought. This rather troubling thought has a lot of people concerned about the way in which we should be progressing towards the singularity. The best thing we could do as we head into the singularity is to ensure that AI develops into an ethically sound ecosystem, instead of using it to spy, scam, and steal from people, which, in reality, is what it's currently being used to do. Then, there are also concerns about defining when the singularity has been reached. What is consciousness? How do we know when machines have it? What is intelligence? What is of value to us? What is art and what is not? All these questions need to be answered for us to know when machines are indeed more intelligent. This is capable of triggering a modern renaissance that is not simply technological, but also philosophical, in that it causes us to try and define the human experience like never before. It can also help us reflect on what we as the most intelligent species have done to our planet and its other inhabitants. But how near is all of this? Ray Kurzweil, renowned inventor and futurist, has said we may reach the singularity by 2049. Ray attributes this oddly specific date to what he calls price-performance calculations per consistent dollar. Look, I'll explain. He plotted these said numbers from 1980 through 2050 in 1981. In 2015, those numbers were roughly where he predicted them to be. Others are skeptical of such claims. Most notable amongst them are Noah Chomsky, widely regarded as the father of modern linguistics and one of the most cited scholars alive. What makes his perspective interesting is that he perhaps possesses a deeper understanding of language than most of us. This is a very important part of creating a generally intelligent machine, since understanding how we communicate with other humans will help us communicate with other potentially conscious machines. His perspective is that we are nowhere near where we need to be in terms of our understanding of the cognitive processes that go on consciously and subconsciously to be able to mimic them. Can we define a theory of being smart? He asks. He's certainly right about the complexity of human language and the nuances of what we say versus what we mean. It's why emotions like irony, sarcasm, and rhetorical questions are still unsolved puzzles in the world of AI research. But do we really need to be able to mimic the entire process if we can simply reproduce the effect? What if we are simply able to reprogram some aspects of learning and let computational ability take care of the rest? Max Tegmark, American-Swedish physicist from MIT, is interested in investigating the risk of extinction from artificial general intelligence. He likes to use the analogy of when man first discovered fire. It was a wonderful discovery that has paved the way for modern life, but it hasn't always been safe. It's caused a lot of death, pain, and suffering in the process. But we are where we are because we were able to learn from our mistakes and devise things like fire escapes and fire extinguishers. AI might be the same at the start, but the only difference here is that we only have one shot. It's all or nothing. If AI lights a fire, we may never be able to extinguish it in hopes of a next time. But there are critics who doubt that this is how the future will actually play out. Unlike Chomsky, they don't doubt the exponential progress or its ability to mimic human-like computation in the future. Instead, they doubt whether the future will be so aggressively against our survival. While a technological singularity is coming, we shouldn't fear it. Instead, we should embrace the progress it can bring. Such is also the perspective of Garry Kasparov, widely considered as the best chess player of all time. He was on the other side when IBM's Deep Blue finally beat humanity's best at a game it invented. Garry believes that instead of seeing this as a man versus machine contest, we should take it as an opportunity to realize the potential of augmentation. That's definitely more comfortable to think about, considering we've been augmenting ourselves with technology for decades now. First with things like calculators, and more recently with mobile phones. After watching a recent Apple keynote, it mentioned that Apple CPUs have gotten over 100 times faster in recent years, and their GPUs over 1,000 times faster. Singularity doesn't have to be an apocalyptic mess where every moving piece of metal is trying to kill us. It doesn't have to be a deceptive reality where no one and nothing can be trusted. It can simply be a reality where we're free to explore other dimensions of the human experience and engage in our creative pursuits to not put food on the table, but simply for the sake of them. In both of the major criticisms against the idea of a technological singularity, neither party actually denies that it's coming. They're either saying it's not coming anytime soon, or that it's not going to be as bad as we think it is when it does. Or you could argue that the technological singularity is nearer than we think, and it's going to be much, much worse than we anticipate. What then? Does it really matter how we prepare or what policies we come with? Whatever the answer, one thing remains the same. It's coming. And if I were you, I'd get ready.
It could be terrible, and it could be great. It's not clear.
Right.
But one thing is for sure, we will not control it.
Go is arguably the most complex board game in existence. Its goal is simple: surround more territory than your opponent. This game has been played by humans for the past 2,500 years and is thought to be the oldest board game still being played today. However, it's not only humans that are playing this game now. In 2016, Google DeepMind's AlphaGo beat 18-time world champion Lee Sedol in 4 out of 5 games. Now, normally a computer beating a human at a game like chess or checkers wouldn't be that impressive, but Go is different. Go cannot be solved by brute force. Go cannot be predicted. There are over 10 to the 170 moves possible in Go. To put that into perspective, there are only 10 to the 80 atoms in the observable universe. AlphaGo was trained using data from real human Go games. It ran through millions of games and learned the techniques used and even made up new ones that no one had ever seen. And this is very impressive alone. However, what many people don't know is that only a year after AlphaGo's victory over Lee Sedol, a brand new AI called AlphaGo Zero beat the original AlphaGo. Not in 4 out of 5 games, not in 5 out of 5 games, not in 10 out of 10 games, but beat AlphaGo 100 to 0, 100 games in a row. The most impressive part? It learned how to play with zero human interaction. This technique is more powerful than any previous version. Why? It isn't restricted to human knowledge. No data was given, no historical figures were given. With just the bare bones rules, AlphaGo Zero surpassed the previous AlphaGo in only 40 days of learning. In only 40 days, it surpassed over 2,500 years of strategy and knowledge. It only played against itself and is now regarded as the best Go player in the world, even though it isn't human. But wait, if this AI learned how to play without any human interaction, made up strategies of its own, and then beat us with those strategies, then that means there's more non-human knowledge about Go than there is human. And if we continue to develop artificial intelligence, then that means there's going to be more and more non-human intelligence. Eventually, there's going to be a point where we represent the minority of intelligence, maybe even a very minuscule amount. That's fine though, we can just turn it off, right? It's a thought, but think. When modern-day humans began to take over the planet, why didn't the chimps and Neanderthals turn us off? If this artificial intelligence becomes super intelligent and learns through and is connected to the internet, well, we can't just shut down the entire internet, there's no off switch. So what happens if we end up stuck with AI that is constantly and exponentially getting smarter than we are? What if it gets to a point that us humans get in the way, and the AI hits the off switch on humanity? When people think of AI, they tend to think of super intelligent AI. AI that serves the human race but could also end us at a moment's notice. But is this really going to happen? Pop culture, mostly movies, tend to depict AI not as benevolent creations, but rather as robots with malicious intent. Except for Tarzan in Interstellar, he's pretty cool.
Yeah, you can use it to find your way back into the ship after I blow you out the airlock.
There's a lot more to AI than you might think. There's a lot more types that serve different purposes. Artificial narrow intelligence, also known as weak AI, is the only form of artificial intelligence that humanity has created so far. It makes this sound kind of bad, but trust me, it does a really good job at what it's supposed to do. Narrow AI is AI that is created for the sole purpose of handling one task. It's the kind of AI that AlphaGo is. Narrow AI is good at speech and image recognition, and also at playing games like chess or Go, or even pretty complex games like Dota 2. At the International 2017 World Championship, OpenAI's artificial intelligence destroyed pro player Dendi 2-0. But much like AlphaGo Zero, it wasn't taught how to play the game. It played out millions of years worth of 1 versus 1 matches against itself and learned on its own. It started out barely knowing how to walk, and eventually as time went on, it surpassed human level skill. If you use Spotify, you'll see that it creates daily mixes for you based on the music you listen to. Amazon learns from it, teaches itself your buying habits to suggest you new products. But it seems like a common reoccurrence where these AI teach themselves how to do the task at hand. How is that even possible? Well, through something called machine learning. Machine learning is the science of trying to get computers to learn and think like we humans do. Machine learning is essentially the same way that babies learn. We start off as small screaming sacks of meat, but Over time, we improve our learning. We take in more data and more information from observations and interactions, and most of the time we end up pretty smart. The most popular technique out there to make a computer mimic a human brain is known as a neural network. Our brains are pretty good at solving problems, but each neuron in your brain is only responsible for solving a very minuscule part of any problem. Think of it like an assembly line, where each neuron in your brain has a certain job to do in order to completely solve a problem. Let's make a simple example of a neural network. In order to say that someone is alive, they have to either have a pulse or they must be breathing, but not necessarily both at the same time. This yellow dot represents a neuron in a neural network. It functions just like a neuron in your brain does. It takes in information and then gives an output. If this neuron takes in the information that says, hey, this person has a pulse and is breathing, then the neuron deciphers this information and says, okay, this person is alive. It learns to analyze situations where the human would be declared alive, if it's breathing or has a pulse, and situations where the human would be dead, where neither of those is true. That's essentially a bare-bones explanation of how it works. Of course, no neural network is really this simple. Many have millions of parameters and are much more complex than just this one-layer network. The world is full of sounds and visuals and just data in general, and we take in all of this to form our view of reality. However, as more and more complex topics show up with more and more data, it becomes harder and harder for humans to do this analysis on their own. This is where machine learning comes in handy. Machines can not only analyze data given to it, but also learn from it and adapt its own view of it. Let's go back to AlphaGo Zero. In only 40 days, it surpassed thousands of years of strategy and knowledge and even made up some of its own strategies. But how did it do all of this so quickly? Biological neurons in your brain operate at about 200 Hz. That's proved to be fine for us, but modern transistors operate at over 2 GHz, an entire order of magnitude faster. Those neurons in your brain travel through what are known as axons, and they travel at about 100 meters per second, which is pretty fast and gives us pretty good reaction time. But it's only about a third as fast as the speed of sound. Computers, however, can transmit information at the speed of light, or 300 million meters per second. So there's quite a big difference between our brain's capabilities and a computer's. In just 1 week, a computer can do 20,000 years worth of human-level research or simulations or anything it is trained to do. A brain has to fit inside your head. There's a limit to how much space it can take up, but a computer could fill an entire room or even an entire building. Now obviously weak AI doesn't require an entire server room to run. Like we saw with OpenAI, it only took a USB stick. But for more intelligent AI, it may require much more power. Artificial General Intelligence, or AGI, is AI with more than a single purpose. AGI is almost at or equal to human-level intelligence, and this is where we're trying to get to. But there's a problem. The more we search into it, the harder and harder it seems to be able to achieve. Think about how you perceive things. When someone asks you a complicated question, you have to sort through a ton of unrelated thoughts and observations and articulate a concise response to that question. This isn't exactly the easiest thing for a computer to achieve. See, humans aren't able to process information at the speed of light like computers can, but we can plan things. We can think of smart ways to solve problems without having to brute force through every option. Getting a computer to human-level thinking is hard. We humans can create things, we invent things. We create societies and play games and laugh. These are all very hard things to teach a computer. How can you teach a computer to create something that doesn't exist or hasn't even been thought of? And what would be its incentive to do so? I believe AGI, or strong AI, is the most important artificial intelligence to be created, and here's why. Machine learning is exponential, meaning that it starts off rather slow, but there's a certain tipping point where things start to speed up drastically. The difference between weak AI and strong AI is millions of times larger than the difference between strong AI and super intelligent AI. Once we have the artificial general intelligence that can function like a human being, for the most part at least, it may help us reach superintelligence level in only a few months, or perhaps even weeks. But here comes another big problem. See, many people tend to see intelligence on a graph like this. We have maybe an ant here, a mouse at about here, the average human here, and maybe Einstein right here just above. If you asked most people where a superintelligent AI would lie on this graph, most would probably put it somewhere around here. But this just isn't the case. Although AI might not be at human level intelligence yet, It will be one day, and it won't stop at human level. It'll most likely just zoom past and continue getting on more and more advanced until, eventually, the graph looks something like this. This is what is known as the technological singularity, where artificial intelligence becomes so advanced to the point where there's an extreme explosion of new knowledge and information, some that might not even be able to be understood by humans. If we make a super intelligent AI, that AI would be able to improve upon itself, and in turn get smarter in a shorter amount of time, which means that this new and improved AI could do the same thing. It continues to repeat this process, doing it faster and faster each time. The first recreation may take a month, the second a week, a third a day, and this keeps going until it's billions of times smarter than all of humanity. Compared to chimps, we share about 96% of their DNA. We are 96% chimp, but in that little 4%, we went from being extremely hairy and mediocre primates to a species that has left the planet. We're a species that plans to colonize Mars, a species that made missiles and millions of inventions, all compacted down into that 4% DNA difference. The number of genetic differences between a human and a chimp is 10 times smaller than the genetic difference between a mouse and a rat, but yet only being 4% different from them, their entire fate seems to lie in our hands. If we want to, for some reason, put a McDonald's on a chimpanzee habitat, we just do it, we don't ask. There are 5.5 quadrillion ants on the Earth. Ants outnumber us 1 million to 1, and yet we actually live like they don't exist at all. If we see one crawling on a table, we just smush it and move on with our day. What happens when the day comes where AI becomes the humans in this situation, and we become the ants? Super intelligent AI is different from software we know today. We tend to think our software is something that we program and the computer will follow our rules. But with highly advanced AI and through machine learning, the AI teaches itself how and what life is, as well as how to improve it. After a while, there is no need for any human interaction. Perhaps humans would even slow it down as opposed to speeding it up. We have to be careful about how we make it. As Sam Harris has stated,
and the first thing you want to do is not give it access to the internet, right? You're just going to cage this thing, right? So because you don't want it to get out, right? So, but you want to tempt it. You want to see if it's trying to get out. How do you know whether it is? So this is called a honeypot strategy, where you tempt it to make certain moves in the direction of acquiring more power.
For example, if we're somehow able to give a super intelligent AI orders and it follows those orders, it may just take the quickest and easiest route to solve them. Just because we make a super intelligent AI, that doesn't mean that it's going to be wise. See, there's a difference between intelligence and wisdom. Intelligence is more about making mistakes and acquiring knowledge and being able to solve problems through that. Wisdom, on the other hand, is about applying the correct knowledge in the most efficient way. Wisdom is being able to see beyond the intelligence gained and being able to apply that to other things, in hopefully a productive way. If we give AI an order to solve world hunger, well, the easiest way to solve world hunger is just to kill all life on the planet and then nothing would ever be hungry again. But obviously that isn't what we want. We would have to somehow teach the AI to have human-like values, a moral code to follow, and somehow work around that. In a way, we'd want it to be like a super intelligent human cyborg. You may not even realize it, but the majority of humans are already cyborgs. Humans are already becoming less biological and more technical. We already put our minds onto non-biological things. How? Well, many of you are watching this video on that device right now. Phones. Your phone has become an extension of yourself. It can answer any question you could ever ask at a moment's notice. There's only one problem though. Your inputs are just too slow. If we were able to create a high bandwidth link between the brain and the internet, we would be literally connected to everyone and everything on the entire planet. This is what Neuralink is aiming to do. Create what is known as a neural lace. Your brain has two big systems, your limbic system and your cortex, and these two are in a relationship with each other. Your limbic system is responsible for your basic emotions, your survival instinct. Your cortex is responsible for your problem-solving skills, your critical thinking. Neuralink is aiming to create a third layer to this. The AI would be like a third wheel in this relationship, but would increase our capabilities by multiple orders of magnitude. We all would have eidetic memories, picture-perfect memory. We would have access to all the information available to the world and be able to access it instantly. With the addition of this third layer, people may eventually realize that they like this newfound knowledge and way of living more than the alternative, more than living without this newfound AI that has been installed into them. Eventually, people may decide to ditch their human body, their biological self, in favor of the artificial world. This, of course, is a long ways away, but it doesn't mean we shouldn't think about it. There are of course many problems and counter-arguments that come up, and I'll address some of them now. For starters, how do we program something like consciousness? We don't even know what it is yet. How do we program something like a limbic system into a machine? Something that has a sense of fear, perhaps even a fear of death. Can a machine or an AI really love someone or show that emotion? Because if it can love, it can also hate, which could raise big problems for us in the future. This is a fear of many people when the idea of superintelligent AI is brought up. The biggest and most pressing question is, will it be pleasant or will it be hateful? Could it even be either of those things in the first place, and more importantly, is it even necessary? Sure, a superintelligent AI would have all the information in the world at its disposal, but then again, so do you and I. So do all of the people in the world with very radical views. Who's to say that a superintelligent AI wouldn't adopt these views as its own, and then decide to execute on those instead of what we had planned? Sure, it's possible that a superintelligent AI could improve upon itself using knowledge it gained, but then again, it isn't pulling random improvements out of thin air. It's not just going to unite quantum mechanics and general relativity with raw mathematics. What if some of its upgrades needed experiments to be run? What if it needs more information? Is it just going to make it up? This leads into, what if the AI learned to lie, and then decides to lie to us about its accomplishments for its own selfish reasons? It's also possible that the progress of computing will slow down, and it looks like it already is. I mean, look at airplanes. In the past 100 years we went from this to this. But like many things, there's a threshold that is hard to get past. But if we do get past this barrier, the upsides could be tremendous. It's almost obvious that superintelligent AI has the capability of making humanity billions of times better than it is today. But on the flip side, it could also be used as a weapon. Just think, like I said before, if this thing is running for a week and it has access to all of the world's information, it could make over 20,000 years of technological progress. You let this thing run for 6 months, and you could potentially have 500,000 years or even more of technological progress. Imagine if this got into the wrong hands, and imagine the repercussions it would have. When you Google something, not only are you giving out data and telling a potential artificial intelligence what you're thinking, you're also telling it how you're thinking. We feed it all of our questions, all of our answers. If we were going to try and program a limbic system into an AI, we would be teaching an artificial intelligence what we're afraid of. Out of all the data in the world, over 90% of it has been created in the past 3 years. AI learned how to recognize faces. It learned how to recognize voices. It learns languages and then will eventually translate between them all seamlessly. This knowledge and information train could continue until it has went through all 100% of this data. This is why artificial intelligence is such an important topic. Superintelligent AI is the last invention that humanity will ever make. Once it's invented, it can't be uninvented. The technology and developments that could possibly turn the human species into immortal, godlike figures is coincidentally the same technology that could also cause the downfall of humanity. Many people are resistant to the AI because they fear it may have some of the negative traits that we humans do. It may be greedy, it may lie, it may be selfish, it may be rebellious, it may be short-tempered. The power of superintelligent AI is there, patiently waiting to be found. But the question is, do we actually want to find it?
New York City, one of the United States' most recognizable cities. In September 2020, one of the many artistic landmarks of the city was repurposed. It was the Metronome near Union Square. If you've ever walked by it or have seen it online, you'll probably notice two things. One, a giant piece of artwork by Kristen Jones and Andrew Ginsel that is supposed to convey instancy and infinity, transience and permanence all at once. While the pulsing nature of the artwork is supposed to embody the city's energy, elements such as the massive piece of bedrock symbolizing millennia of geological history, and the rippling centerpiece all come together to help the viewer visualize one thing: time. Another thing you might notice is the nearly 60 feet long display of digits. This digital facet of the artwork is what allows it to be reprogrammed to fit such an occasion. Previously, it was used to display the time of the day, and the number of hours, minutes, and seconds that remain in it. It is all fittingly titled The Passage. But this September, this artwork embarked on a new mission. The numbers changed to not display only the regular time, but the time that Earth has left in our carbon budget before, given the current rate of emissions, we crossed the 1.5 degrees Celsius threshold outlined by the IPCC in 2018. Now, it all sounds like things people have heard before. Scientists come up with numbers, they urge how important it is, and then people move on with their days. This is different. A complete depletion would result in a total destruction of our planet, and it will have been at the fault of our own hands. If the Earth's temperature is increased by just 1.5 degrees Celsius, we will feel its consequences. Extreme heat waves, fire across the world, droughts in places there shouldn't be, and less of the one resource on Earth we all need: water. The concern for climate change is certainly nothing new. In fact, it's been with us not for just the past few decades, but for centuries. British archaeologist Ian Morris spoke at the World Economic Forum to talk about how civilizations in the past had collapsed. He incorporated modern-day scientific methods, excavation practices, and billions of artifacts to dissect the collapse of previous civilizations. He concludes by saying that all major collapses tend to have 5 common factors, time and time again. Firstly, they tend to have massive, uncontrolled population movements that overwhelm societal infrastructures. Pretty much overpopulation. Secondly, they have major pandemics and diseases, which, because of the population movements, spread and merge faster. Then there's state failure and increased warfare. This in turn leads to an economic collapse. And then there's one final piece of the puzzle: climate change. Civilizations rarely collapse because of one thing. And so, these 5 factors can often co-occur, and it's their combined effect that leads to the collapse of civilization. It's easy to see how these factors connect with each other, because all of these things are taking place right now around the world. Climate change is displacing millions of people, a pandemic is ravaging the world as we speak, and bad governance about these issues is making it all worse. And while the population growth is certainly not out of control, it is, in fact, declining steadily. All in all, we're well on our way to collapsing. Ian Morris says there is some hope, however. In fact, in his study of past civilizations, he notes that quite a few actually survived the 5 horsemen of the apocalypse and rebuilt themselves afterwards. He credits their survival to economic growth. Now, I'm really not about to debate capitalism versus other economic models in the world, because, well, I don't want to start a war. In his book about the future of human civilization, Homo Deus, historian Yuval Noah Harari notes that, although we experience occasional economic crises and international wars, in the long run, capitalism has not only managed to prevail, but also to overcome famine, plague, and war. In fact, in modern times, we've experienced so much economic growth that today more people die of eating too much than eating not enough. It turns out, we have a little too much stuff sometimes, and that too much stuff isn't produced out of nothing. Beyond the dollar value we pay for things, there's a far greater cost to abundance, an ecological cost. The overuse of unsustainable natural resources, water pollution, soil pollution, loss of biodiversity in recent times has meant that we are closer to ecological collapse than we have ever been. Even though in the past there wasn't a global governing body like the United Nations to oversee and recommend actions to reduce our environmental footprint, the footprint itself was always very localized. People hardly traveled as far as we do today, and business was not nearly as robust. Sure, a few centuries ago, there were no solar panels or recycled plastic, but there also weren't any fuel-hungry airliners either. We also weren't siphoning oil and fossil fuels out of the ground either. The scale of the industrial world, it seems, is truly unique to our time and civilization. There are, of course, other aspects to our civilization that make it more unique, and, by extension, more complicated. Total nuclear obliteration is still a non-zero possibility, and as low as that number might be, the simple possibility of something like that happening is terrifying. Both natural pandemics and bioweapons are also a threat. In fact, both are quite common throughout the history of collapsed civilizations. Until very recently, more soldiers died from disease than from actual combat itself. It's just that modern advances, while allowing us to cure far more diseases than before, have also opened up a Pandora's box of future threats. There's obviously the threat of runaway superintelligence as well. Such a technological singularity can encompass the threat of nanotechnology, and their rising incorporation into everything from manufacturing to medicine. All of these factors understandably complicate the modern infrastructure, and Joseph Tainer, a historian, suggests that this rising complexity is what could ultimately be our society's downfall. He suggests that societies emerge as problem-solving collectives, that's what they're there for. But eventually, they reach a point where the complexity and intricate structures required to solve problems actually reach a point of diminishing returns, and civilizations collapse under their own weight. Tied to this idea is that of energy return on investment, or EROI for short. Simply put, it's how much energy is needed to produce or extract a set amount of energy. Fossil fuels have historically had good EROIs, but as we're burning through tons and tons of non-renewable fossil fuels, this EROI is steadily declining. The EROI for petroleum, for example, has fallen by around 10 times in the past century, because, well, we're stealing all of it. Besides, despite being more in line with our goals of a greener future, as it stands, renewable energy sources are quite hard to develop, manufacture, and implement, which doesn't help their EROIs either. These are all factors that are truly unique to our time, and they sound pretty complex. However, there is one factor that civilizations in the past have certainly never had before: social media. It's unique in the sense that there's never been a platform that allows us to connect with so many people so easily. It's a society within our society. One we certainly didn't evolve to live in. It was just a byproduct of other advances. Of course, social media has led to some wonderful things, like every other element I just talked about. It's allowed lost families to reconnect, allowed fundraisers to reach significantly larger audiences, and it's given a platform to the ordinary person. But the problem with social media, well, it's much more nuanced. Much like the cost of biological advancements, there's the threat of virality in social media too, only it's much, much worse. If falsehood spreads 6 times faster than truth on Twitter, then there's only ever going to be one winner in the battle of ideas. The virality of ideas, or bad ideas I should say, is a newfound threat to civilization. It means the ripple effect of a bad idea is now much more likely to escape the geographic confines in which it took place and affect the rest of the world. The sharing of misinformation on social media has led to levels of polarization that have never been seen before. Lack of tolerance seems to be at an all-time high. You see, one of the psychological side effects of prolonged social media is a broken concentration. You could argue that that's less of a side effect and more of an objective. Regardless, people are constantly glancing at their phones no matter what they're doing, and it's turning them into short-sighted individuals who are preoccupied with the next burst of dopamine. That is exactly the problem we're facing with climate change and ecological collapse. We now have a world that is unwilling to look beyond the next presidency or the next election or the next generation or two. Social media, in this case, might just be a good analogy. But the fact of the matter is, we are slowly but surely walking towards the collapse of civilization as we know it. Now, while an asteroid strike or an alien invasion is a more spectacular possibility, they're not nearly as likely as, say, a slow ecological collapse. A popular saying goes, civilization may not end with a bang, but with a whimper. The moral imperative to do something really presents itself when you think about the number of lives that will eventually be affected by climate change, ecological collapse, or another factor that might cause societal collapse. The number of people presently alive pales in comparison to the number of people that can be alive in the future, on this very planet, at least as long as the sun isn't too close. That number skyrockets once you factor in the possibility that, given enough time, civilization could become multiplanetary. But that's the thing, enough time. We barely have enough time to think about the policies of today, let alone tomorrow. Think about this. A man named Danny Hillis invented the idea of a 10,000-year clock in 1984 with one singular purpose: to encourage long-term thinking. As the name suggests, this clock will continue ticking, without human intervention, for 10,000 years when construction is complete. Much like the metronome near Union Square, this clock reminds us of time, albeit in a different way. This clock is not necessarily counting down from something, but by its sheer presence, its sheer scale, it serves to remind us that the world will go on long after we've passed. And as such, we can still have an impact. Who knows, maybe under thousands of layers of sediment and fossilized remains, there could lie buried another civilization exactly like ours, at this exact stage of their journey. Their time had come. 7 years, 36 days. The passage ticks away. second by second, to remind us that ours will too. Have you ever stood on a mountaintop, or gazed up from the bottom of a roaring waterfall, or sat in a field staring at the stars above? Did it inspire you in a feeling of insignificance? Where do you go to seek out those humble yet peaceful moments when you come face to face with a world larger than you? Nature is a place of spirituality for many, yet because of the climate crisis, nature as we know it is dying out. Wildfires, algae blooms, mass extinction. We're watching life on Earth disappear right before our eyes. It's not just that our homes are threatened, although that is true. The loss of nature makes us feel like we're losing something essential to our humanity. Is there a correlation between our suffering planet and our spiritual despair? What if I told you that our very idea of nature is responsible for environmental destruction? And what if upholding this concept of nature is exactly what's causing us to feel disconnected from our physical world? Maybe living in a world without nature is the very thing needed to save our planet. The concept of nature has been ingrained into our culture with the help of art and literature. Artists and writers interpret the landscapes they deem beautiful throughout their work. The inspiring beauty of the Simplon Pass in the Swiss Alps whispered to poet William Wordsworth. He wrote that black drizzling crags and unfettered clouds were like the workings of one mind. In their own view through the environment, the poet encountered God. Rural Massachusetts had a similar effect on Henry David Thoreau. In 1862, he published an essay in The Atlantic entitled Walking, about the benefits of spending time outdoors. I think that I cannot preserve my health and spirits unless I spend 4 hours a day, sauntering through the woods, over the hills and fields, absolutely free from all worldly engagements. He encouraged people to take up the same habit, especially those who spend their days in the city hunched over a desk, or, like many of us, in front of a computer screen. You must be sure your walk takes place in dense forests or untilled fields because, in Thoreau's words, roads are made for horses and men of business. We go to nature to find tranquility and a much-needed break from our hectic lives. But where exactly is this nature we go to? And is it such a bad thing if nature as you know it doesn't exist? These are frightening questions to confront. Think about your daily routine. You wake up, check your email or socials, and drink your coffee or tea or water during your commute. Or you might pull on a pair of sweatpants with an old t-shirt and log onto your morning Zoom meetings. You bemoan the endless hours you spend scrolling through social media. On most nights, you grab takeout, unable to find the time to cook. You go to bed tired and wake up the following day to do it all over again. Amidst your daily routine, do you ever encounter the sublime? You probably don't have time, and even if you did, you wouldn't know where to find it in your everyday surroundings. Those soaring and soul-feeding emotions are reserved for the family trip to the Grand Canyon or your weekend hike in the Redwood Forests. In the meantime, though, we push those emotions aside. You might finally feel at home in the world when you're standing in front of the expansive ocean. It's difficult to harness that feeling while you're waiting for the bus in the middle of a blizzard. We use the natural world for recreation. Let's consider that word for a second. Recreation. Nature is where we go when we're broken to become whole again. But the benefits of nature are exclusive and reserved for those who can afford it. A lot of people aren't able to take a vacation from their jobs or don't have the means to get out of the city for the weekend. There's a conception that nature is a common good. The stream belongs to no one. The fall foliage of the forest is for everyone to enjoy. Only those with money and enough free time can enjoy the wilderness. If nature doesn't exist, and if for many people it's inaccessible, where do we turn to find inner peace in our otherwise chaotic world? Let's back up for a second. When I say nature doesn't exist, I mean that the concept of nature was invented by people. This might seem counterintuitive. We think of nature as the only place left on Earth untouched by human hands. But maybe that's by design. Let me explain. Our idea of nature exists inside marked boundaries and places blocked off from where we decided society shouldn't be. And in that way, nature is just as constructed as town and urban centers. When early colonists came to the Americas, they were faced with a daunting challenge. They were determined to transform a land of dense forests, impenetrable mountains, and roaring rivers into the concept of a functioning place. For their society to work, they needed to harvest and pillage the land for resources, to build homes, roads, and farms to sustain the newly arrived European populations. There was also a demand for goods native to these lands back home. Things like sugar, coffee, and furs were imported and exported, creating a global system of trade. The task at hand must have felt insurmountable. It's hard for us to truly grasp the awe early settlers felt coming across this vast expanse of untouched and seemingly empty wilderness with their ambitious goals in mind. Only, the land wasn't exactly untouched, and it was definitely far from empty. Indigenous peoples cared for and tended to the land for thousands of years before European arrivals. Not to mention the countless species of birds, plants, fish, and all other creatures that harmoniously composed a complex system of life. Early colonists understood wilderness as an obstacle to their goal of establishing an orderly civilization in the New World. Their idea of society didn't account for the vibrant life already thriving for millennia prior to their arrival. The invention of nature didn't happen consciously. The ideals and goals early settlers imported from their homes overseas required that the vast wilderness of the new continent be tamed. Their philosophy was in direct odds with the indigenous teachings that rely on a holistic understanding of people's place in relation to their environment. As indigenous cultures were systematically destroyed or wiped out, this wisdom was being buried because it threatened the project of building a society that would more closely resemble European cities. From the perspective of early colonists, society is built and maintained by people, whereas nature encompasses all that is outside the human domain. This idea informs how you understand the world today. When you're at home, at work, at the store, you feel as if you're in society. You are contained by the infrastructure built by people, such as roads and buildings. When you're camping in the woods, you feel like you're in nature. The trees exist for their own sake. You turn to nature to feel free from the confines of civilization. Nature even feels like a unified and coherent place to most of us. We say things like, "I think I'll spend this weekend out in nature," or "I hear British Columbia has beautiful nature," in conversation without a second thought. This phrasing flattens any distinctions in a landscape. The Amazon rainforest and the Great Barrier Reef are both considered nature. That label ignores the particular ecology of each environment on Earth. Nature strips uniqueness from the world. Using this term causes us to overlook the nuances and details inherent in life on Earth. Each tree becomes the same as the others. Once you've seen one squirrel, you've seen them all. If we're so flippant about nature and our language, we further entrench our misguided beliefs. Our idea of nature only implies a vast elsewhere free from our everyday baggage. Nature, in this context, simply refers to where society isn't. National parks, camping grounds, and large expanses of private property, these areas exemplify how borders have been drawn to people to contain a place to be called nature that is separated from society. Nature is the place we've created to escape what we consider our greatest invention, the society we live in every day. We're alienated from our need to connect to the earth on a daily basis because we don't believe true nature exists where we spend most of our lives. We have this idea that our real home exists elsewhere. Think of Thoreau needing to divorce himself from society in order to find what he called spiritual fulfillment on his daily walk. If we can only connect with the most precious parts of ourselves when we're in a faraway nature, what happens to our spirit in the day-to-day? Why have we created a society we wish to escape? Can't there be a way to live without needing to turn to nature to do our true soul searching? The consequence of upholding nature is that the landscape where we actually live the majority of our lives becomes cheap in comparison. We rarely consider that the world directly outside our front door is connected to the global system of life in the same way as a lake or a forest. There are ecosystems within our cities and suburbs, and they're beautiful too. The best part is we are an integral species within these webs of life. In the early 1960s, environmentalist Peter Berg was thinking a lot about this. To Berg and his friends, it became clear that people should take cues from their local ecosystem and should consider their place within them. he advocated for bioregionalism. It's a philosophy that suggests political, cultural, and economic systems are more sustainable and just if they're organized to include the ecology of the immediate physical environment. In this formation of the world, a boundary between nature and society is redundant. Bioregionalism relies on the interconnectedness of all systems of life, those created by humans and those that exist outside the human domain. The construction of human activity should be in harmony with the systems of the Earth. Acknowledging and interacting with your immediate environment will make you more at home in the world. You could try your best to eat local and pay attention to the growing seasons where you live. You'll notice the food tastes better because you're eating it when the harvests are most nourishing. As the days get shorter in the winter, maybe in the long evenings, you'll rest. It could be that the Earth is giving you more darkness because you need it. Or on your daily walk to school or work, what plants do you notice? You might not know the names of them, but how do they change throughout the seasons? Noticing is the gateway to curiosity. When you pay attention to what kinds of birds are fluttering outside your window or the squirrels hopping from branch to branch, it's difficult to miss the abundant life surrounding you every day. Noticing isn't easy. It takes practice to break the habit of not noticing. We're so used to walking with our heads down, eyes on the sidewalk. It's common to take what surrounds us every day for granted. It can also take time to notice. Think about the yearly cycle of a tree. From one day to the next, you can't expect to see the leaves turn and fall or the buds emerge and blossom. But if you observe the same tree every day over the course of weeks, months, and years, you will witness its full cycle revolve in front of your eyes. Directing your attention towards your bioregion can help combat loneliness and social alienation. When you have a relationship to the land where you live and work, you are part of something greater than yourself. We need to treat our homes with the same reverence we grant most of the beautiful and pristine landscapes on Earth. By doing this, we'll become better stewards of the Earth, because we will learn to foster a deep connection to the land without seeking it elsewhere. In other words, nature is wherever you can find it. In June 2019, Kirsten Muller-Wahl, a psychiatrist at Hanover Medical School and head of its Tourette's outpatient department, noticed unusual symptoms in her new set of patients. To begin with, all of them were teenagers, and they were suffering from sudden and uncontrollable tics. Even though none of them had any history of the condition, they were all shouting different kinds of obscenities. Muller-Wahl consulted her tight-knit group of global Tourette researchers and found out that her newest patients were not unique. It seemed that a shift in patients and symptoms was happening all over the world, and what was even more surprising was that it was happening at the same time. But what really puzzled Muller-Wahl was that most were repeatedly shouting the same phrase: "You are ugly." As it turned out, this phrase was the key to understanding the strange spike in cases. 4 months before the mysterious global outbreak, a 20-year-old German suffering from Tourette's named Jim Zimmerman launched a YouTube channel and a TikTok page detailing what it's like to live with his condition. He immediately became a social media sensation, gathering more than 2 million subscribers on YouTube and millions of views on TikTok, where he shows his viewers how his condition can force him to blurt obscene words or experience uncontrollable tics and convulsions. Zimmerman had the tendency to blurt out the phrase, "You are ugly," one that he shared with all new-style patients suddenly appearing all over the world. After making this connection, researchers found that all the patients who suddenly claimed to have tics were also fans of Zimmerman. When Muller-Wahl confronted her distressed patients and told them that none of them actually had Tourette's, most of them recovered immediately. But despite their recoveries, this case presented researchers with an unprecedented psychological mystery, showing how imagined symptoms can spread purely from TikTok videos. While these teenagers didn't suffer from Zimmerman's condition, something triggered their minds to believe that they did, and all of a sudden, all of them simultaneously and independently developed these TikTok tics. With TikTok becoming one of the most used social media apps today, it's becoming even more important to consider. Could TikTok be causing a mass psychosis? Mass psychogenic illness, or MPI, also known as mass sociogenic illness, is a real occurrence where a group of people starts feeling real physical symptoms at the same time, even though there's no physical or environmental reason for them to be sick. The dancing plagues of the Middle Ages were probably the most bizarre form of MPI. In July 1518, residents of the city Strasbourg were struck by an uncontrollable urge to dance. It started with one woman stepping into the street and dancing for nearly a week before she was joined by 36 others who also seemed to have the same uncontrollable urge. The town then hired musicians to provide backing music, which only worsened the situation as more people joined in. It wasn't long before the marathon started to take its toll. By August, the dancing plague had 400 people in its clutches, with 100 of them dancing themselves to death. More recent but less dramatic cases include a boarding school in Mexico, where a student developed leg pain and paralysis. Soon after, hundreds of their schoolmates began experiencing the same symptoms. In East Africa, 3 girls who started laughing uncontrollably managed to infect over 100 other students, forcing their school to close down. The triggers for mass psychogenic illnesses cannot be entirely isolated, but they can easily spread among people who share the same anxieties, fears, and sense of community. This is what makes the TikTok tics an even more intriguing study. TikTok rapidly gained popularity during the pandemic as a trendy dance video and crazy challenge app. But since then, it has established itself as the world's most popular app, with nearly 3 times as many users as Twitter. A recent study even found that it has dethroned Google as the most popular domain in 2021, with most of its visitors using the app as a primary search and discovery platform. With over 1 billion active monthly users who spend an average of 95 minutes a day using the app, it has become more important than ever to understand what kind of effects TikTok has on our brains. While the effects of social media on our mental state have been a topic of debate for the past decade, the emergence of TikTok is different. It allows users to watch an unlimited stream of new content, observe trends rise and fall daily, and find something new with each swipe. Because the videos are often extremely short, the user can quickly decide whether to continue watching or move on to something more interesting. This constant stream of information can narrow and exhaust our attention span over time, limit our concentration, and affect our short-term memory. TikTok places a constant focus for content to be delivered in 60 seconds or less, making anything longer feel like it's a waste of our time. Some users have reported that they don't even have the patience to watch 10-minute videos on YouTube anymore, even when the topic interests them. This reduction in our attention spans can come from a variety of risk factors, such as poor academic performance, communication struggles, social isolation, relationship difficulties, stress, and anxiety. A recent study conducted by Curtin University in Australia has shown that the heavy use of social media can lead to problematic mental health consequences, especially for people with lower attention spans. Which brings us back to the TikTok tics. This curious Tourette's case was the first form of social media-induced sociogenic illness. In addition to the teenagers in Germany, about 50 patients across the globe presented the same symptoms, which demonstrates the domino effect of our social media landscape. Constant exposure can lead to low attention spans in those that never had the issue before, which can lead to psychological illnesses which can, in turn, spread imagined conditions around the world, in a way that we never even dreamt of before the age of the internet. According to TikTok, videos tagged with the hashtag Tourette's have been viewed more than 5 billion times. The unexpected appeal of these videos among teenagers can be attributed to a need to stand out or be different. But the truth is, videos like these also provide a sense of community, acceptance, sympathy, and validation, which all seem to be present in patients suffering from MPI. Even though Zimmerman's intentions were to show his followers what it's like living with Tourette's, it also validated violating social conventions and gave proof to young, impressionable viewers that the more disruptive you are, the more viral you'll go. This is the basic concept behind TikTok. The whole idea is to promote videos that can go viral in an instant and push young content creators to produce similar content. That's why the first thing you see when you open the app is the For You page, where short videos that are carefully selected to grab your attention are displayed. It's why the video's on autoplay and shown in an endless scroll, and there's no signalization of progress or duration of the experience. All these features are intentionally designed to grab and keep the attention of young users for as long as possible, and urge them to create similar content if they want to get that attention for themselves. In a recent interview, comedian Andrew Schulz talked about how TikTok's algorithm promotes useless content in the West, but shows entirely different content centered around innovation, architecture, and science in China. Like Schulz, many argue that TikTok is intentionally making people dumb by manipulating user behavior and pushing mindless content on its impressionable young viewers. To that point, TikTok trends have included things like the Blackout Challenge, where children were tasked with holding their breath until they fainted, the Penny Challenge, encouraging kids to push pennies behind partially plugged phone chargers, which could have dangerous results, and the Tooth File Challenge, where young users were causing permanent damage to their teeth just for some of that desired attention. The more these videos went viral, the more content creators saw it as an opportunity to gain traction on the platform. This in itself feeds the vicious cycle of harmful content that leads to illnesses similar to the TikTok tics and other mental disorders. Today, TikTok is being looked at in a number of US states to determine its influence on its young users' mental health. According to Dr. David Barnhart, clinical mental health counselor at Behavioral Sciences of Alabama, all social media platforms impact how a person views themselves, but because of TikTok's rapid-fire influx of content, users are exposed to dozens of videos within minutes, which makes the effect much more devastating than other platforms. Users can easily become addicted to the app and may seek constant stimulation as a result. This constant stimulation increases stress and anxiety levels, especially with numerous videos that fuel body dissatisfaction, appearance-related anxiety, and much more. Mental health professionals have reported seeing a number of younger patients who spend considerable time on TikTok, claiming to have severe mental health conditions such as schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. And the main issue with such claims is that more exposure to targeted content can influence teenagers to misdiagnose themselves with a mental illness without consulting a professional, only because they can relate to some of the symptoms of a TikTok influencer they follow. Just like the TikTok tics case, young adults who self-diagnose can also do so from a desire to feel like they're part of a community, or to rebel against social constructs, and in the process, they can genuinely believe that they suffer from a specific illness, even when they don't. The flip side to all of this is that there are several positives that can come from highlighting mental health issues online. The sense of community, which can be harmful in some cases, can also be helpful in normalizing these conditions and sending the message that people aren't alone. Young people suffering from their own issues can come together and support each other with helpful tips on how to deal with depression, anxiety, and other hurdles in their daily life. Videos discussing mental health get millions of views on TikTok every day and draw people to symptoms that some people may not have realized were an issue. This can spur people into action and encourage them to seek help. As with all things, there are positives and negatives, which is why experts don't believe that deleting TikTok is the answer. Instead, regulating and monitoring the time spent on the app is key. Otherwise, the social media-fueled mental health crisis is only going to get worse. The age of the internet has definitely brought out a whole new dimension of concerns that we should worry about. But TikTok itself has changed the online world. It's a cultural phenomenon with a superior algorithm that is unmatched by its social media rivals. It's built to ruthlessly and aggressively collect your data, and constantly feed you content that's for you. Content that could change the direction of your life, warp your perceptions of the world around you, and even cause mass psychogenic illnesses worldwide. MPIs have existed for hundreds of years, and yet a lot of the reasons why they happen remain a mystery. But what we can learn from the TikTok tics case is that we're now entering a new era of social media-induced sociogenic psychosis, and apps like TikTok have more control and power over our youth than we thought. The best predictor of future behavior is previous behavior, and based on what we already know, we've most likely not seen the last of social media-induced psychological illnesses. For now, at least you had the patience to watch this entire video. Thanks for not swiping to check out the latest escalator dance clips or watch a guy deep cleaning a horse's hoof. You wake up to the sound of the alarm on your iPhone, and annoyed that you couldn't get more sleep, you grudgingly unlock your phone to see what's going on in the world. And there's an email from Amazon telling you that your package has been delivered. So you force yourself out of bed to get the package, and it's some Johnson & Johnson medicine you ordered the night before. The wonders of overnight shipping, you think to yourself. You glance across the room to see the clock. It's 8 AM and you have to be at work by 9. Flustered, you open your Microsoft computer to answer some work emails before getting dressed. There's no time to cook breakfast, so you'll just grab something at McDonald's on your way to work. What if I told you that every single company you just interacted with within the first hour of your day is heavily influenced in large part by one company, Blackrock? Now, I'm sure you've heard about Blackrock. There are dozens of videos here on YouTube that talk about how it's the company that controls the entire world. But the reality is far less glamorous. Here is why everything you've heard about Blackrock is wrong. Before we talk about that, let's talk about data. Every time we browse on the internet, companies collect an insane amount of data from us, information which is then sold to data brokers, who in turn sell it to the highest bidder or just lose that information in data breaches. According to a report from the Identity Theft Resource Center, there were 68% more breaches in 2021 than in 2020, and that number is only going up. A few months ago, my friend got an email telling him that his information was released in a data breach from a company that he had never heard of, and right after he started getting personalized email ads from shady companies. This is how scammers are able to figure out your phone number, name, and even your address. Blackrock is an investment firm that controls a huge number of shares in some of the largest companies in the world. They have a total of $10 trillion in assets across the globe. That's an amount equal to half of America's total GDP, controlled just by one company. It's easy to dismiss such a powerful company as all-out evil, but the truth is, BlackRock doesn't own these companies or even own shares of these companies. Their clients own the shares, BlackRock simply manages them. That's not to say that BlackRock doesn't have any influence on these companies, they definitely do. Because they control such an incredible amount of their stock, it's possible that companies want to keep in BlackRock's good graces, so they don't pull their investments. Now, while BlackRock might not be the evil company some people make them out to be, the truth is, there's still something very shady about them. Their hypocrisy. BlackRock was founded 34 years ago by Larry Fink, and he grew the company from $5 million in value to $8 billion in just 5 years, primarily by managing money invested by large institutions like pensions, university endowments, and substantial fortunes invested by the uber-rich. Today, Fink serves on the Council on Foreign Relations and the World Economic Forum, commanding the attention of business tycoons and political leaders around the globe, and his company is on the cusp of consolidating so much power that it could essentially control the world.
Let's talk about the speed with which we are watching this market deteriorate.
The worst day on Wall Street since the crash of 1987.
The 2008 financial crash turned out to be an incredible opportunity for BlackRock. It secured an uncontested contract to control many of the banks that had collapsed. That gave Larry Fink, who was already incredibly wealthy, even more power, and a direct line to the American government. The same thing happened in 2020, during the early days of the pandemic, when the government called in BlackRock to protect the Federal Reserve from financial fallout. Periods of economic uncertainties like these were key to BlackRock's rise to power, and as the famous saying goes, with great power comes great responsibility, and BlackRock would like you to think that they are being responsible. In the summer of 2020, while the world was angry about the murder of George Floyd, BlackRock came out with a statement saying that companies had to serve a social purpose, and that they would be giving every company an ESG, or environmental, social, and governance score. Companies that promised more diversity in hiring and leadership or offered environmentally friendly policies and technology received higher scores than companies that didn't. Although this concept had been around since 2004, BlackRock became the loudest proponent of ESG investing in 2020, and in all honesty, it worked. Before this statement, ESGs were mentioned in far fewer than 1% of earnings calls, but by May 2021 that number rose to around 20%, and it has since remained the fastest growing segment in the asset management industry. People are more concerned about the environmental and social impact of companies, and that's a good thing, right? Socially responsible companies get the upper hand in an ideal world, yes, but we all know that the world we live in is far from ideal. While there's been some positive improvement, the main result of BlackRock's ESG statement has been a massive surge in companies participating in practices like greenwashing, pretending they're more sustainable, diverse, or responsible than they actually are. It's also exposed the hypocrisy of BlackRock itself, because while it claims to champion ESG investing, the company remains the largest investor in fossil fuels and war profiteering, and maintains a pretty friendly relationship with human rights violators. And it's not just BlackRock, the second largest investment firm in the world, Vanguard, is guilty of the same technique, promoting ESG investing on the one hand, but on the other, unwilling to stop investing in oil and gas companies or pull out of companies with questionable human rights practices. We see this time and time again from BlackRock. They do something that seems like they're moving in the right direction in the eyes of the public, but behind the scenes, they're unwilling to tamper with their investments, even if it's for the greater good of society. Take climate change, for instance. BlackRock says that climate risk is investment risk, meaning that investing in companies that aren't creating policies to help address climate change is a risky move. In 2021, BlackRock actually did do something about this by helping shake up the board of ExxonMobil and installing new members who promised to take action on climate change. Previously, the oil and gas behemoth was responsible for 2% of the world's emissions. Now there are new self-imposed mandates to help reduce that over time. This is a great move by the company, no doubt, but the fact that it's still the world's single biggest investor in fossil fuels makes this feel more like virtue signaling than actually trying to make meaningful change, and the hypocrisy doesn't end there. As mass shootings continue to end lives in the US, BlackRock has spoken out against gun violence and said that gun manufacturers should do more to protect the lives of the American people. But who's the largest investor in gun manufacturers? You guessed it, BlackRock. The investment firm holds a 16% stake in Sturm Ruger, 15% in Vista Outdoor, and significant percentages of other manufacturers just like them. BlackRock says it talks to these companies about improving safety, but so far, it's unclear whether or not there's actually been any policy change. Outside of America, BlackRock's US Aerospace and Defense Fund has billions of dollars invested in major weapons contractors worldwide, like Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, and General Dynamics. They're supporting these companies that then get huge Pentagon contracts and use taxpayer money to engage in violence and war around the globe. Often, these weapons are supplied to foreign governments in the name of peace, like Saudi Arabia, which received weapons from the US government and used them to indiscriminately attack civilians in Yemen during years of civil war. Funding this spread of war and an increase in nuclear weapons shows that BlackRock constantly skirts its own commitment to human rights. So does its engagement with authoritarian governments. BlackRock is officially the first global asset manager to have access to China's mutual fund, leaving critics wondering, what did Fink promise Chinese President Xi Jinping to allow him to access the Chinese Communist Party's fund? To be fair, BlackRock isn't the only investment company out there looking to do business with China, but because of its widespread power, it's been the most successful in gaining a foothold in the controversial territory, which is surprising, especially for a US company. This power also made it a major player in the war in Ukraine. As we saw in China, despite its emphasis on ESG investing, BlackRock has a tendency to overlook human rights in favor of monetary gain. It's been investing in Russia's most prominent companies for years. The British pensions that BlackRock controls alone have contributed $630 billion to Russia. After Russia's annexation of Crimea in 2014, a precursor to what would become the more now than a year-long war in Ukraine, BlackRock reconsidered some of its investments in Russia, but just 1 year later, it was back to being among the top shareholders in the country's biggest corporations. Even when it became clear that Russian President Vladimir Putin was planning an invasion last year, BlackRock didn't budge, and like most other Western firms, it did, eventually, pull assets out of Russia once the war started. But think about all the money it flooded into Russia over the years. Money that the authoritarian government controlled and used in its expansion mission that led to this deadly war. All of this begs the question, how did one company gain this much global power and influence? Well, it started with technology. BlackRock's business is built on ETFs, or exchange-traded funds. An ETF contains diversified investments to reduce an investor's risk. Rather than buying stock in a single company, you're investing in a fund that buys stocks, commodities, and other securities. This practice proved to be very lucrative for BlackRock and its investors thanks to a portfolio management software it created in 1998 called Aladdin. Aladdin predicts the possible outcome of every investment and collects information and personal data on everyone who has ever knowingly or unknowingly given BlackRock money. This allows the software to predict how likely it is that a specific investment will fail. Eventually, this technology put Fink and BlackRock on top, making the company the go-to firm for ETF investing, which keeps getting more and more popular. Global ETF assets could explode to $25 trillion by 2025, meaning trillions more for BlackRock. But we don't need to wait until 2025 to see the effects of the power BlackRock has. Right now, BlackRock oversees assets worth 10% of the entire world economy. Companies like Fox, Comcast, and Disney have to consult with BlackRock before they make major moves, since it has such a large share of their ownership. BlackRock and other large firms like Vanguard are the biggest investors in global giants like Google, Facebook, and Amazon. This level of ownership creates an anti-competitive environment. You feel this in the prices of airline tickets. BlackRock and Vanguard are among the 5 largest shareholders of the 3 biggest airline operators, which means that there's very little incentive to lower prices in order to compete with each other. This level of ownership consolidation reduces consumer choice and raises prices, and it also means that eventually a handful of powerful people at these investment firms could wield more power than the executives at the companies they own shares in. Even Jack Bogle, who founded Vanguard, says that this kind of ownership concentration is bad. Too much money in the hands of too few will not work out well for the global economy. There are solutions that governments could put in place to stop these companies from gathering too much influence. Things like not allowing funds and ETFs to vote as shareholders in companies, or creating ownership caps that would dictate how much of a company can be owned by a single entity. The laws can be passed limiting how much influence an investment firm can have in the companies they're invested in, even if that influence is intended to be benevolent, like with the ESG. But how soon could any of this happen? Because BlackRock and Vanguard are less than a decade away from managing $20 trillion in assets. That would upend the asset management industry and intensify the already staggering ownership consolidation of the world's largest companies, sending prices through the roof. One of the biggest problems with this system of business is that the more money BlackRock manages, the lower its fees for investors, so we end up in this cycle where the best way to invest our money today creates a potentially catastrophic environment for our money and our society tomorrow. Unfortunately, most people don't have the luxury of looking that far ahead. What looks good in the short term is all that matters, and that is how Blackrock thrives. It hopes you'll overlook its hypocrisy around the environment, diversity, and human rights because it puts out statements about being a responsible company. Its future hinges on its investors not caring about these things. The problem is that many of its investors don't even know they're investors. They're simply part of a pension fund or an endowment that Blackrock manages. There are smaller funds that do support ESG investing without conflicts of interest, and there are options like managing our own shares that help us avoid the moral pitfalls of large companies like Blackrock. But much like how most of us couldn't live without Amazon's next day delivery for our last minute essentials, using these large flawed companies is just easier. Over the past decade, the public has become more and more critical of what massive companies do and say. As that magnifying glass emerged, Blackrock made sure that its messaging about making the world a better place was heard and publicized. Blackrock's hypocrisy won't end. Its public image versus private actions will most likely always conflict with one another, but as consumers and investors, it's our responsibility to know what's happening. Taking them at their word is the easier option, but that's exactly what Blackrock is betting you'll do. That's how they've gotten this far. This is the same ignorance that allowed banks and governments to drown us in debt. Click the video on your screen right now to find out more. 4.18. This number is the reason that you're alive right now. Under normal conditions, that's how many joules of energy you need to raise the temperature of a gram of water by 1 degree Celsius. Also known as the specific heat capacity of water, this value, this property of water, it's special. You see, if this value were any different, life as we know it would not exist. If it were higher, more energy would be needed to raise the temperature of water. The amount of water that evaporates into the atmosphere would reduce, and that means so would rainfall. This also means that there would be a greater difference between the temperature of air near land and the air near water. The resulting changes in pressure would lead to changes in the wind speed, temperatures would significantly drop, and species would slowly go extinct. On the other hand, if the heat capacity were lower than it is now, water would evaporate much quicker, and it would no longer be able to regulate the temperature of the Earth as it does now. It would rain all the time, crops would die, and again, species would slowly go extinct. 4.18, it seems, is just the right amount of energy. This just rightness is seen in other aspects of life on Earth too, including where it sits in the solar system. Too close to the sun, and the water would just boil away before it could form. Too far, and it would just freeze. But all these properties are in some way, shape, or form related to water, and so it's no wonder then that the search for life anywhere in space is essentially a search for water. And we found it. Lots of it, actually. You see, hydrogen is the most abundant element in the universe, and oxygen is the third most abundant. In between them is helium, which doesn't really react with much. So when the conditions are appropriate, water can be formed. And it is. Given the scale of it all and how old the universe is, you'd imagine that there must be some planets in an Earth-like distance from their respective stars to allow for the formation of liquid water, and by extension life. Dr. Frank Drake attempted to answer this very question in 1961 using the Drake equation. He used factors like the average rate of star formation, how many of those stars could have planets, how many of those planets might develop intelligent life forms that could possibly communicate, and so on. Instead of the entire universe, Drake focused only on our galaxy, which is huge, and for practical limitations of speed and time, really the only thing we should worry about anyway. Understandably, these inputs are all assumptions, and as such, the output of this equation is also an assumption. Depending on who and when you ask, the result of the Drake equation could be anything from a small number that is barely greater than 0 to a number in the tens of millions. Our intuition tells us that if that number were somewhere in between that immense range, the Milky Way should be beaming with advanced civilizations making interplanetary journeys with regularity. Just our galaxy, one of the trillions out there, is so incredibly large that even with astronomically low odds, you would expect to find at least some other civilizations. To give you a sense of how large it is, modern humans have been around for nearly 200,000 years, and in that time, light, at its incredible speed, has traveled the complete width of the Milky Way. Only twice. Okay, so let's run through this. The Milky Way has a lot of stars, and a lot of those stars have a lot of planets, and a lot of those planets should have a lot of water, and a lot of those planets have been around a lot longer than Earth, so therefore they should have a head start compared to Earth. So that must mean that there are civilizations a lot more advanced than ours, which should have all the tools they need to communicate with us. If that's the case, there's just one problem. Where is everybody? That's the question Enrico Fermi asked in 1950. Using a similar line of reasoning that I just talked about, Fermi too was confused as to why we hadn't already come in contact with aliens, considering how abundant they should have been. Known more popularly as the Fermi paradox, this question draws attention to the discrepancy between the supposed high likelihood of civilizations out there and the lack of observational evidence to prove their existence. To this day, 70 years after Fermi's equation, even with the scientific advancements that we've made, we are yet to receive any signals from a civilization other than our own. So really, where is everybody? Nearly 50 years after Fermi asked his famous question, an economist named Robin Hanson figured that, just as humanity had done in the past, we may have just been asking the wrong question all along. He felt that, instead of sticking to the assumption that the universe should be filled with life forms like our own, we should accept what the evidence is telling us, that life is exceedingly rare, and that the Earth is the only planet we know that has it, and that we should use that information to understand why we're here and how long we might have. Well, if that's the case, Hanson argued, then there must be something wrong with the typical steps of reasoning that lead to the incorrect perception of life's abundance. Either one or more of these steps are wrong, or one or more of these steps are so incredibly improbable, life elsewhere is practically impossible. And thus, the idea of the Great Filter was born, a hindrance that is so immense in its complexity and improbability that we are quite literally the only species to ever get past it. It's perfectly possible that the Great Filter was whatever initiated abiogenesis, the creation of life from non-living, simple organic compounds. After all, it's a process that runs counter to the laws of thermodynamics, in that it involves molecules to spontaneously arrange themselves in an ordered, life-giving manner. It would be like a cold cup of water just naturally going hot, which, by the way, is physically possible, only unimaginably unlikely. Things like that just don't happen. Hot things go cold and things tend towards disorder, so life never really should have formed. The Great Filter could also be the formation of complex-celled organisms. Or it could be the first proper replication of DNA that allowed for just enough mutation that would eventually sow the seeds for evolution. Or it could be the collision of Earth with a protoplanet named Theia that led to the creation of the Moon, and with it a reliable access and a stable climate for life to flourish in. It could be a lot of things, really. I don't know. Regardless, if we were to assume that the Great Filter was indeed in our past, it would explain why we are the only ones remaining and why the rest of the universe seems so utterly dead. But it would also say that we have done it. We've made it past the Great Filter, everyone gets a pat on the back, and that's really it. But what if the Great Filter is ahead of us? What if the universe was, indeed, beaming with life just as we expected it to, but something simply kept filtering or killing civilizations one after another, which is why no one has really reached out to us? And more importantly, what if we're next? Given the general lack of evidence regarding other planets and why they don't have life, a filter in the future could be just as likely as one in the past, if not more likely. So, what are some of the possible filters that could possibly wipe out life as we know it? As it turns out, the abundance of galaxies that we point to when we search for other forms of life may just be the very reason why they don't exist. Our neighboring galaxy, Andromeda, is a mere 2.5 million light-years away from us, but scientists predict that it's getting closer. In about 4 billion years, it might collide with the Milky Way. These collisions are common enough in the cosmic timescales that they're important, and although the likelihood of planets colliding with each other is exceedingly rare given the distances between stars and planets, other massive objects might interfere with the effective gravity of Earth, or whatever planet humanity is on when Andromeda and the Milky Way galaxy collide. This might plug them out of the orbit they were in, and jettison them out into the emptiness of space, where life simply ceases to exist. Extrapolate this possibility far enough, and you have a possible explanation as to why life is so rare. The cosmic commonality of galactic collisions keeps destroying life before it can take an intergalactic form. We've just been lucky so far. But you might think that galactic collisions are super rare and still in the distance, so how about we focus on something more closer to home, something more recent instead. In 1989, millions of people in Quebec woke up to heaters that were no longer working in a city that was completely out of power. In one of the rare and extreme cases of coronal mass ejections, or simply solar storms, Quebec's entire power grid failed after 90-some seconds of this geomagnetic storm from the sun. Effects were felt in other parts of North America and beyond as radio signals were jammed, satellite measurements went haywire, and elevators stalled. Each of these solar storms can carry well over 100,000 times the energy of today's nuclear arsenal, so they're not to be taken lightly. But typically, these storms are distributed over the entire volume of space around the sun, so by the time it reaches Earth, most of it simply dies out. The Quebec-style outage is certainly rare. Scientists only predict such storms once every 100 years. But one only needs to think of a world where we rely on electricity more than we do now. Where not just our phones, but our cars, planes, and even the military run on electricity. This is why these solar storms are classified as high-impact, low-frequency risks. They don't happen often, but when they do, they can be catastrophic.
On the 15th of February 2013, a dash cam in a car captured what is perhaps one of the most iconic space-related videos of recent times. Known as the Chelyabinsk meteor, it had entered into the Earth's atmosphere undetected, and due to its high velocity and shallow angle, had turned into a bright, brilliant streak of light that was at one point brighter than the sun. Before atmospheric entry, this 20-meter wide object was believed to have had the energy of a bomb that is roughly 30 times more powerful than the one detonated in Hiroshima. It injured nearly 1,500 people and damaged over 7,000 buildings from shockwaves of the initial explosion. New evidence keeps emerging about the extinction-level threat that asteroids possess. You would think that with such a strong presence in pop culture and wisdom from the leading scientists of the world, the modern world would be much more aware of a threat than ever before. But we're actually pretty underprepared for such an event. Initial plans included nuking the asteroid, but that would in turn lead to smaller radiation-bathed chunks falling back onto Earth. Genius idea there, boys. Another strategy could be to fly a ship to the asteroid to create enough of an impact to shift its trajectory. But a 2019 paper from Johns Hopkins University suggested that asteroids are stronger and harder to destroy than previously thought. And given a large enough asteroid, none of these measures may be enough to save life as we know it. I chose these events specifically because they're all things that have already happened, albeit at a smaller scale, and continue to happen at a regular basis, galactically speaking. And while extinction-level events are rare, and very unlikely in the generations to come, we must remember that if life can sprout from improbabilities, it can end with them too. These are just some of the ways civilization can meet its end. Everything from social media to a global pandemic to civilization itself could be hypothesized as the great filter that awaits us as humanity's final test. But as always, there are some fundamental flaws with the idea of a great filter and the definitions of life it relies upon. Our sample size is 1. This one data point is all we have ever known. How can we say with such confidence that a life form, advanced or otherwise, would even bother to explore beyond the comforts of its own home? Just because we exhibit colonial tendencies does not necessarily mean it has to be a universal phenomenon. And what if life just is different elsewhere? What if, instead of water, life lives off ammonia or methane or another such solvent and the life that develops in it is fundamentally different from our own? Our current definitions of life are simply too specific to be able to incorporate all the possibilities hidden in the vastness of space. The idea of the Great Filter is shrouded in such deep improbabilities, and such extreme extrapolations that it is sometimes hard to pay attention. It is one of the more hypothetical topics out there, with so much simply based on speculation. There might as well be no Great Filter after all. The improbability of our existence may not be because of one or two steps in the line of reasoning, but because the entire process is one life-nourishing coincidence after another. The Great Filter seeks to remind us about how lucky we are. Lucky to be here, at this very moment, out of the billions of years for which the universe has existed. Lucky to have come this far and be so aware of our place in reality. And lucky to realize how fine-tuned the universe seems to be for you and me to live in it. From the position of our galaxy to the exact values of the natural constants, one after another. From water's abundance to its specific heat capacity. 4.18.
13.8 billion years. That's how long the universe has existed. Older than the planets, stars, as old as time itself. The universe is immeasurably vast. To put it into perspective, if we reduce that timescale down to a single year, the entirety of recorded human history, you, me, and everyone else who has ever lived, would take up a minute at best. Our lives, the long decades of joy and sorrow, pride and regret, every dreary morning and sunny afternoon, would represent around 1/5 of a second. This cosmic calendar, first popularized by Carl Sagan in the 1970s, is meant to show us just how precarious our position is in the universe. We have not been here long, and if the last few months of life on this cosmic calendar are any indication, we won't be here much longer. Over the past 4 weeks, our planet has been wiped clean of life nearly 6 times over. Of all the billions of species to ever exist, more than 99% have gone extinct. It would probably be a little arrogant to assume that we, who came along only a few minutes ago, are somehow different from all those who came before us, that our species could and should be the first to endure past our time. But the fact that we're even talking about this at all suggests that maybe we are different. We built telescopes, searched the stars, and pieced together the story of our universe. We engineered tools, dug pits, and unearthed the stories of our ancestors. And in all that searching, we found no sign that there's ever been anyone or anything like us. The fact is, humans are adaptable. Most humans are uniquely suited to the environments they evolved in, and if their habitat changes, they don't change with it, they go extinct. Humans are different. When it gets cold, we don't freeze. We knit ourselves sweaters and light a fire. When it rains, we aren't swept away by the flood. We build barriers and divert rivers. The list goes on. Forests burn and we douse the flames with water. Earthquakes topple cities and we rebuild them stronger. We've gotten so good at adapting to our surroundings that at this point, most natural disasters don't pose much of a threat to our species as a whole. But what couldn't we withstand? What, if it happened tomorrow, could end the human story instantly and infinitely? These are the biggest threats our species faces, the threats which seek to make us history, like the 99% who came before us. These are the most dangerous things in the universe. There are many theories as to how the universe might end, and all of them posit that we won't be around to see it happen. One theory suggests that the universe, which once began by expanding ever outward from a single point, will continue to do so for all time. The evidence for this is clear. Every day our own Milky Way galaxy grows more and more distant from the neighboring galaxies as the space between them expands, so it makes sense to conclude that then, eventually, they'll disappear from our view altogether, leaving us alone in the dark. We can live like this for billions and billions of years. The galaxies, though spread apart, will hold together. But eventually, the stellar nurseries which add new stars to our galaxy will run dry. The remaining stars will age and burn into nothingness, leaving only black holes to suck up everything that remains. A hyper-advanced civilization could cobble together distant stellar remnants to create new stars, but in time, these too will run out. There will be no material left for us to use, no energy to sustain us, and eventually, the black holes will decay too. This is known as the Big Freeze, and it is one threat we cannot escape. While the galaxies are, on the whole, growing apart, there are a few exceptions. 2.5 million kilometers, or about 1.5 million miles from us, lies the Andromeda Galaxy, and it's on a collision course with the Milky Way. In 4.5 billion years, this collision will tear both galaxies apart. Surprisingly, this in itself won't hurt us. On a cosmic scale, the stars and planets of our two galaxies are actually so distant from one another that no star will directly collide with another. Black holes, however, are a different story. They can grow far, far larger than any star, and almost every spiral galaxy, including Andromeda and the Milky Way, holds one at its core. If our sun comes too close to either one of these supermassive black holes, we'll be consumed or, at best, ejected into interstellar space. While we already know about the eventual death and rebirth of our galaxy, there's one smaller, more local danger that could threaten our solar system in the same way. The appearance of a rogue black hole. Black holes form when a massive star runs out of fuel at the end of its life cycle. Unable to burn as hot as it once could, the star can no longer support its own weight, so it collapses inward until the gravity is so great it warps the fabric of space-time itself. While black holes normally stay in the same place as their original star, violent stellar events like the merging of two separate black holes can send them hurtling out into interstellar space at incredible speeds. It's not easy to spot objects drifting in the lightless voids between stars, and an object that absorbs light itself is even more impossible to spot. If one wandered close enough to our sun, its massive gravity would disrupt the orbits of every object in the solar system, slowly but surely throwing the planets into disarray. As it consumes the planets and asteroids in the outer solar system, it'll only grow larger, until finally Earth gets caught in the path of the singularity. After stripping the planet of its atmosphere and us along with it, the black hole's gravity would create tidal waves as large as Mount Everest, stretching the Earth's crust like a ball of dough until finally, the tectonic plates rip apart, exposing our planet's molten core. As we pass the event horizon, everything that was once our home will be crushed into rubble, then dust, then atoms. In this scenario, the best strategy would be to move ourselves. There are millions of potentially habitable worlds in our galaxy alone, and by establishing settlements there, we give humanity a backup plan, saving us from being done in by any one galactic calamity. This is the same strategy we'd use to avoid extinction through the expansion, contraction, and eventual death of our own sun, which will inevitably cook and consume the Earth just as readily as a black hole would. The hardest threats for us to avoid are those that could happen at any time without very little warning: gamma ray bursts and asteroid impacts. While neither of them will destroy life on Earth forever, they may very well destroy us completely. We know this because they've wreaked havoc before, causing 2 of the past 5 mass extinction events in our planet's history. Gamma ray bursts are massive blasts of electromagnetic radiation emitted by collapsing stars. They emit so much energy that, for the brief moment of their existence, they're brighter than every other star in the universe. If the Earth happened to be squarely in the path of one of these narrow bursts, the effects would be immediate and terrible. 75% of the upper atmosphere, specifically the ozone layer, destroyed in an instant. Without ozone, all life on Earth would be exposed to the harsh ultraviolet radiation of the sun, causing DNA damage and cancers. The long-term effects are even more devastating. For several years, acid rain would fall and photochemical smog would darken the skies, reflecting more of the sun's rays. If this were to happen today, given how unstable our climate currently is, the darkness might trigger a runaway cooling effect, leading to a decade-long winter. These same effects were seen during the Cretaceous Paleogene extinction, or the death of the dinosaurs. Approximately 66 million years ago, a 10-kilometer or 6-mile-long asteroid struck the surface of our planet, carving a near 180-kilometer or 112-mile-long crater in present-day Mexico. The impact instantly vaporized the water beneath it and scattered hot debris across the planet, setting the world aflame. Soot from the blast turned to aerosol and blackened the skies, causing a very real decades-long winter that slowly killed off all the life on the surface. While humans today might survive such an impact by hiding away in a remote underground bunker, the vast majority would be left to die. If an even larger asteroid struck, say, 30 to 60 kilometers, it would completely eradicate all life on Earth, no matter the hiding place. Essentially, if an asteroid or gamma ray burst aimed itself at Earth, there would be very little we could do about it. As gamma ray bursts are impossible to predict, our only immediate solution would be to deal with the effects as best as we can. Unlike gamma ray bursts, which occur in our local group of galaxies only once or twice every 5,000 million years, rogue asteroids are a real and present threat, and the only one that humans have so far taken steps to counter. Since the 1990s, NASA has identified over 25,000 near-Earth asteroids. While many smaller ones may be out there, they've located more than 90% of the asteroids large enough to devastate the Earth. While no large asteroids are currently on a collision course with our planet, NASA scientists have proposed and even tested a solution to counter them. In September 2022, NASA deliberately flew the Double Asteroid Redirection Test Satellite, or DART, into the asteroid Dimorphos, measurably changing its orbit. Should a world-ending asteroid come barreling towards the Earth, we'll simply nudge it out of the way long before it ever reaches us. While the dangers we've discussed so far are possible, inevitable, and devastating, they only come along every 100 million years or so, if that. The odds that one will happen in the foreseeable future are slim to none. In that sense, the most dangerous thing in the universe isn't simply that which could cause the most destruction, but the one that's most likely to. For that reason, we are the most dangerous thing in the universe, at least to ourselves. If we are to die, the odds are overwhelmingly clear that it will be at our own hands. There will be no death from above, no gamma ray burst or rogue black hole. It'll be because we chose to die, either through the negligence of human-caused climate change or the short-sighted malice of nuclear war. We invented the machines that warmed our planet, causing droughts, floods, and massive storms. We invented the bombs that can annihilate millions in an instant, and each day we choose to keep them armed and aimed squarely at our own heads. At this moment, there's over 12,000 active nuclear warheads on our planet. A full nuclear exchange will instantly wipe out entire cities, and in the aftermath, radioactive fallout will eventually kill billions. The skies will darken and plunge our planet into a nuclear winter, slowly starving everyone else unfortunate enough to survive, just as it happened 66 million years ago and 400 million years before that. The Bulletin of Atomic Scientists keeps a symbolic clock that measures humanity's proximity to doomsday. In 1947, when the clock was first unveiled, an expert panel of scientists and academics judged that we were 7 minutes to midnight to our own extinction. When the Soviet Union fell, ending the Cold War, they turned the clock back to 17 minutes. But now, as we fail to deal with climate change, as nuclear arms treaties fall apart and as Russia once again threatens war with the West, we're 100 seconds from midnight. At this moment, we have two paths forward. We can listen to our collective inner voices of reason and survive our own present together, or we can all join those who went before us, only this time, our extinction would be by our own hands.
First, you'll have to know what happens when an atomic bomb explodes.